Welcome to the After Church Pod. I'm Pastor Brian, Joe, and this is where we sit around and we talk about Jesus-y things after church. Thus the name. And we're going to talk. We've been talking through a book on politics, and today we're going to talk a little bit more like we did last week about some current political, cultural issues. But first of all, just how you doing, Joe? What's going on with you? You're taking this next Sunday off.
2 Sundays.
2, that's right.
Yeah. Well, I want to acknowledge that last Sunday was in the park. And for those of you who are online participants, you may have wondered what happened there. And we did in the park. It was a lot of fun. And there's Sam in the background. He's probably leaving because he doesn't want to be on the podcast. But yeah, it was fun. Setup was easier than anticipated, and it was right next to the disc golf course. So, like,
that's a win.
During your sermon, there were 3 ladies playing disc golf behind you.
Oh, I didn't notice.
Well, it's good. And I probably shouldn't have noticed. It was just like, oh, that was a good throw. Oh, what did Brian say? Oh, shoot.
Short sermon too. I don't know, like 10 minutes, 15, something like. Wasn't long. Maybe 20. It could have been 20. I don't know. It was short.
Yeah, it was not. It was not a protracted, overlong sermon. No, it was.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah. So, and then this week the Olympics started, and that kind of brings us to what we were going to talk about today. There's a relatively, it's a little bit of a thing, talking about some of the things happening in the opening ceremony. And what we're talking about is, I don't even know, I guess it's the whole, there's a table thing, and I remember I first heard about it through some Facebook or YouTube posts saying, oh no, it's this big blasphemy thing and all of that. And I'm like, and quite honestly, because I know how sinful our culture is, I was like, oh, well, that's expected, and moved on. How did you hear about it?
Well,
Go ahead. I've been on.
Well, Vanessa recorded it, and so we just sat down and watched it, and a lot of I was watching it as a person who appreciates art in all forms, and I was really quite surprised and impressed with the logistics that were required, kind of the breadth of the. What's that?
Yeah, the theater major in you still comes out.
Oh, of course. I mean, well, just like there's obviously music, there's singing, dancing, there's technology, there just all these things that kind of came in, and it really, I found it to be remarkable in many respects, and I also was there were times where I was like, wow, and other times I'm like, yeah, whatever. It's not for everybody, right? That's the nature of art, is it's subjective. Right. So when it was over, I went, well, that was kind of cool. I think I'd rather watch gymnastics, but that was pretty cool. I think I also come away from things like that as it's an opportunity to show off. Like, we want to get your attention. We want everybody to see how cool we are. Like,
it plays the culture of the country. It always has.
Yeah. And so I kind of came away with, that certainly makes sense. And we had visited France last year. And so a lot of my taking that in was, I remember we were there. And that's that one place. And that's pretty cool, right? Where you have, So then the next morning I get up and I see like friends are
all
like,
this stuff.
I can't believe this. And I'm like, what are they even talking about? And I had to reflect, on this tableau of the people on the bridge. And I'm like, wow, I don't think I ever would have come to that conclusion. And I wonder, like, did I miss something significant? and I kind of came away going, I don't think I missed anything. But that was my kind of my engagement with it. That's a long explanation, but
And right afterwards, I didn't watch it live, and I watched clips of it, and that's about it because I really don't care. Um, but it didn't take long for me to hear, oh, this was a depiction of the Last Supper that was blasphemous. And I do remember, before I did even very much looking into this, looking at the clips, and I'm like, I don't see the parallel.
yeah,
It's like, yeah, it kind of is there. I get it. I mean, they're clearly divine like figures, especially the one in the middle. But who's the blue guy? And they're just not. They're not setting up the same. And that's one of the things that made me start going, are we reading into this?
mm-hmm.
Right. And then you pointed out a post about this, and so okay, now, well, let's talk about this. So I really have done a little bit more looking into it, and so I'm not sure where we want to go at this point, but do you want to go through the post, or I don't know, how do you want to go forward?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Maybe I think I just want to take another moment to kind of talk about, like, once I saw that people were having an issue, really and maybe this tells you a lot about me. One of my initial thoughts was, like, when I said, did I miss something?
And
Like,
that's so
right? Was I being naive as I watched that? Was there, it was presented from people who were concerned as a direct attack on Christianity, like it was mocking Christianity.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I, like what you said, is I like looked at the Last Supper, and I looked at the kind of photograph, and I went, well, Jesus doesn't even have the thing around his head. So, I mean, sometimes, yeah. And I tried to
Yeah,
look at the poses of people to see if the poses didn't line up, and then I
and
kind
their
of,
first table that doesn't match either.
right, and having watched it, I'm like, well, this was the lead-in to them celebrating fashion in France. And so
Right.
to me, it was a runway with people coming down the runway. I didn't even go to
Right.
any kind of godlike thing. I thought that's a weird looking thing over that lady's head, but she's the DJ. So, the
Oh,
DJ should be celebrated. I mean, that's how
yeah.
naive my response
No,
was.
and we've seen those. If you looked very much at like Middle Age art, middle art from the Middle Ages, they have those things around their head. That's, to me, that was clearly what that was, and I think it is what it is. But is this the Last Supper? I don't think it
No,
is.
it's not.
I don't think it is. And one of this post that you said, here, let's talk around this, is like, is this about the Last Supper? And the artist says no, it's actually a reinterpretation of the Feast of the Gods. And I'm like, I can see that. I agree with that. I think that is probably what it is. And is that still an attack on Christianity? No, no, but there's more pieces to it than that, I
Right.
think.
And maybe that's the first thing to ask is, um, uh, if yes or no, should we interpret this as a direct attack on Christianity, not like an ancillary or sideways, right?
Right.
And I feel like my opinion is that this was not intended to be any kind of attack on Christianity, and like a direct attack. It wasn't like somebody in the back room going,
Right.
"Let's stick it to the Christians."
Right. I think that was the case. Now, did it represent a non-Christian worldview? Now, some may disagree, but I think it does. But it's like, so if this was, let's say, in in Japan, and they did some Buddhist Shinto kind of depictions. Would we have been all worked up over that? Well, no, that's their culture. Okay. But because it's France and they think France is a Christian country, they assume that that's the case. France is not a Christian country. It has not been since the French Revolution, which is what, like 150 years ago? It's not Christian. It's Christian. It has Christian people in it, but it's not Christian. And it reflected their culture, their current culture. Well, a big slice of their current culture.
Right. There were all kinds of aspects of their culture that were represented, and if we took a Venn diagram, there's definitely overlap in certain areas, but it's like I think one of the things I read was it was really intended to celebrate the diversity of their culture, not necessarily of people specifically or gender identity or anything like that. I mean, there were elements of that, but like you said, if the Olympics was in India, there might be celebrating the cow or something like that.
Thing, right?
Yeah. Well, and
not about it.
And honestly, if in the times that we've had the Olympic opening ceremony in the United States, how many times has it reflected aspects of our Christian culture or anything specifically religious?
Right.
I don't know if it ever has.
Some of this is just the assumption. There's some assumptions here, and I want to come back to this because to me this is the key issue right here. But I want to come to the apology, because I found. Did you listen to their apology? The people there was a panel of like the main person of the right, that whole thing, and I found it interesting. My conclusion is we shouldn't be upset about this. Remember that.
Yeah.
But first, I think their apology was not an apology. What they said was, we did not intend this to offend anyone. I agree with that. I don't think they did. Right? But that's a little bit like saying, I slapped you and I'm sorry that bothered you that I slapped you.
Oh, I didn't read it that way.
An apology. You shouldn't have been offended by what I did.
Well, yeah, I don't agree with that though, because I read it as well. No, because what I read was I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Let's see if I can find it here.
I thought it was an explanation more than it was an apology.
Well, sure. So yeah, the artistic director Thomas Jolly. So he was effectively saying, well, here's what was intended by that. It's like if I wrote a song and I triggered something in you that really like made you remember or feel something that was hurt. Well, so the way that we choose to receive it was very different than how it was intended. So what I heard from him, and this again is how we choose to interpret it, what I heard was, well, here's what was intended by that. And I'm sorry if you receive that in a different way. Right. But not, I'm sorry that you're so sensitive that made you feel bad. I didn't receive it that way at all.
Yeah. I just don't think it should be called an apology. I think it should be called an explanation.
Yeah. Well, he did apologize, but I think this is people after the fact. I mean, I saw people that on the Christian side who read that and were like, aha, see, he apologized. So he like as evidence that he knew he did something wrong and was apologizing for it.
Right. And with that, we're both going to agree. Just because you say the words "I'm sorry" doesn't mean everything we sometimes assign that to.
Right. Yeah.
Guilt doesn't mean I'm owning that I did something wrong. No, it could be just like, I have compassion that you got upset about something.
Right. Like when you say that, you said like, oh man, my car, the tire blew out today. And I go, oh man, I'm sorry. Right. I didn't do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, here's another pushback I have on this.
Okay.
Is And this is going to get into a bigger thing. He's like, he means this, and I'm taking him at his word that what he means by this is that it was meant to represent diversity. That it's
Hmm.
meant to that everybody can be everything they want. They can love. I'm almost quoting him. You can love whoever you want. You can believe or not believe, etc. I think he means that. The problem with that statement is that it's a little hypocritical because that does not represent, let's say, a large portion of his country, Muslims. They would not agree with that.
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
that's right. Well, that's why I mentioned the Venn diagram idea, that there are going to be elements there because it's art that are going to resonate with people in one way and maybe not in another. And so, like, there are people, and I don't understand these people, who don't care much about music. And I'm
mhm.
like, how can you survive in this world without music being forefront? I mean, you know what I mean? It's like my world. If I don't have music in my life, I don't think I should be living anymore, right?
Music
But
means a lot to you.
it means a lot to me. I think dance is amazing, but there are some people. This goes back to the conversations 10 years ago or 11 years ago, where you talked during a sermon about certain music is a wet blanket for some people, but it's incredibly moving and engaging to others, and there needs to be some space for that. And so, in trying to accommodate everybody, you're going to offend everybody likely in some way.
Yeah, true. And you are right. And I guess I'm just poking at the general philosophy that of people who 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 say they're for everybody can believe everything. We're
Yeah.
open for but you're really not. You're open for a certain direction.
Yeah.
That's the piece I'm like, no,
Yeah.
not really. Not really. You open in a certain air direction. You can have all these things like, but if you don't agree with that, well then, because it's supposed to represent France, but it didn't represent France. It represented a
Yeah.
part of
I, I,
France.
I would agree. And that's why I brought in the context of like some previous Olympic ceremonies, whether in the States or any place else,
It didn't
where,
represent us either.
well, this was, in my mind, certain elements of this were intentionally provocative. More
I
so
would,
than I would say most, let's say, previous opening ceremonies. Because I recognize that presented within the context of just strictly celebrating Greek culture and the history of the Olympics, which is why we would see this Dionysus feast thing, right? I can see that. I also know there was an agenda behind it to present diversity, the acceptance of diversity, and people from different backgrounds. I don't know if that needed to be there. That's
that's the question. Yeah, that's
right.
right.
So, and that's regardless of anybody's worldview, right? Whether you agree or disagree with the culture it was presented in that message of inclusion and diversity, I don't think that was the right stage for it.
Well, that's true. Yeah,
So that's the provocative piece.
right. Well, and if it had been an overtly Orthodox Christian viewpoint, there would be people who'd be screaming just as much the other side. And is that the appropriate place for that? I could argue no,
Right.
that it would be for that either. Um, so yeah, for me, all of this gets down to I don't think you need to get upset. Is it a non-Christian general worldview? I do think so. Um, I know some Christians won't agree, but even if we take him at his face value that this presents is meant to be an interpretation of the feast of the gods. Well, okay, so that would be like Paul at Athens seeing the statues in of the Roman pantheon. Like, okay, it's not Christian. Okay, sure. Why are you surprised? That's the part that gets me. Why are you surprised that
Hmm.
non-Christians who don't believe in Jesus are acting like people who don't believe in Jesus? Why does it bother you? Why are you expecting it differently? Which is why I got to the point of, like I said earlier, if this would happen in France, in India or Japan, and they're presenting their religious backgrounds, their philosophical backgrounds, you wouldn't have gotten all worked up. But because it's France and you assume they're French, and it's like, oh no, you're really upset.
Right.
When are we
Yeah.
going to thinking and expecting people who don't believe in Jesus to act like Jesus? They're not.
Yeah. When you, that's definitely a big thing that I feel. A big piece of this is the idea that we're trying to project the values that are associated with our faith onto people who aren't in alignment with our faith necessarily. And that
Right.
doesn't mean there's not a bunch of overlap in terms of morality. There are people
Oh,
who are not Christians who, you know,
certainly.
are wonderful people, and 90% of their worldview on these subjects of morality align
Sure.
with us. And so when we project and say, you have to believe what I believe from a moral perspective, even if you don't believe Jesus Christ is king, or God or whatever, it's like, well, they're not in your house, you know?
They're not.
So to me, it's like we're looking for reasons to be offended. And we've talked about this before.
Right. Which gets to a little bit back to the post that you had, and again, there's a lot of arguments here I don't like, but one of the things they do go to is, well, let's take a look at some of the things that you Christians are doing, like having Jesus with a gun. I'm like, why are you not offended by that?
Yeah.
That's more offensive because that's blunt. That's not even, well, maybe it means, maybe it's an interpretation of the Last Supper. No, no, no. This is clear. It's like, wait a minute here.
Yeah.
Be more. We should, as Peter puts it, judgment should start with the house of God.
Yeah. I'll give you an example that is not related to faith, and that's the use of the American flag. Growing up in Scouts, we were taught, obviously, reverence is a part of that, and also alignment really with your country. I mean, is knowing. I'm trying to remember what do they call it? It's very sad. I can't remember the name of the merit badges, but anyway. But recognizing the country you live in and a certain reverence for the
Yeah.
symbology of that. So we learn how to fold a flag correctly, right?
Hmm.
And then people get upset about flags being burned and how dare they disrespect our flag. And these are the same people that have ratty old flags on the back of their pickup trucks. And I'm like, why are you offended at this flag being burned and you've got a ratty old flag on the back of your truck and you're not showing it proper respect? We're being selective in our outrage.
We do that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So watch for the hypocrisy and stop being upset at non-Christians acting like non-Christians, whether it's this or it's the Grammys or a rock concert. It's like that. Why are you I don't understand. Why are they expecting them to be different? That is what they are. The only thing I can think of is they're still holding on to this notion of Christendom that everybody should act like Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Paul did not expect the Greeks, the Romans to be acting like Christians. We shouldn't either. Again, like you said, it doesn't mean that we can't have some common moral stances. Sure, that's not my point. The point is they come from things from a different worldview. Accept it.
Yeah. And if you view things more from that perspective, it allows you to delight when you find that your faith is demonstrated in common, in modern culture, where you
Right.
see like somebody like Chris Pratt get up and talk about his faith in his,
Hmm.
kind of nutty and occasionally foul way. But you can, for me, I love seeing it like somebody who, like Bono from U2, or people out there who are representing our faith in maybe unexpected ways. So if you saw somebody step forward and do that, you're seeking out positive reflections versus looking for reasons to be bitter.
Like Paul did in Acts 17, where he said, I see that you're a very religious group of people, right? So he begins the conversation talking about their idol worship in a positive manner. It still is not Christian. It's still there is as you put it at the very beginning, was it a direct attack on Christianity? No. In a sense, is it? Well, in a sense, yes, because it's not a Christian viewpoint, but it's not meant to be an attack. There's something you can appreciate it. You can appreciate the art. You can express the production. You can appreciate even the sentiment of, hey, let's try to care about people.
Yeah.
And with that,
Well, let me, and this is something else that crossed my mind that's very similar, is that when we read Mark Twain, right? Mark Twain uses language and situations that are offensive to us today,
true.
but it is a representation of what life was like then. So to remove that, as long as we recognize it as a representation of the way it was and not necessarily the way that we wanted it to be, then we can take that and we can choose not to be offended when we hear certain words or see certain situations. And I'm saying that as, if somebody is very progressive and is easily offended by using the wrong word in the wrong, in the wrong moment or whatever. Oh, we don't use that word anymore. Well, okay, well, what do we use? I mean, I'm happy to make an adjustment. Try not to, I don't want to offend you. I can't say try not to be offended because it's like me putting the onus on you. But anyway, that we are all, Christian or non-Christian, really all together too ready to be offended and ready to believe the worst about groups of people that we view as the enemy or view as not
Right.
our neighbor.
Christian as well as non, we all are. We're
Yeah,
victims. Don't
yeah.
be that.
The
Oh, that's where you're at. Okay.
Yeah. The other piece, and I know we've almost used up all our time, that probably struck me as much of anything had nothing to do with what was presented. It was the fact that I saw people, and this happens all the time. It's a common theme with me. I saw people that are smart and thoughtful and loving people that saw somebody respond and then took that and as their own perspective. Like they didn't see the Last Supper there. They never even thought, they probably didn't even watch the opening ceremony. But Andy Stanley got mad and they follow Andy Stanley online and Andy's like, how dare they do this? Oh, like, gosh, that must be true. And they didn't bother to like take a moment to understand, is this really what happened? Like they just like, there was no pause button. It was like, I am going straight to a non-curious, I've been manipulated response.
Yep. Yep. So your point is be thinking. Don't just react and not just take somebody else's opinion, even an authority figure in your life, and just go, well, they must be right and move on.
Yeah.
Think.
Yeah.
Good point.
And I'm a fence straddler. I don't take, it takes me forever to come to, decide what I want to think about something. I drive people nuts. But I do wish people were a bit more fence straddly. When I see somebody that I love post.
Less active and more analytical.
Yeah. Yeah.
which, yeah,
There,
that's really good.
there's definitely times when it's worth us being offended. I like, and I'll give you an example. Is it Bill Maher? Is that his name? He's on HBO. He's a talk show host, very progressive. Anyway, his disdain for Christians is remarkable, and his arrogance is remarkable. And he'll
Yes.
have people that will come on that are Christians, and he's like, like basically like, why are you so stupid to believe that? I mean, anybody with half a brain wouldn't feel that way. To me, that's worth being upset about. It's, if, why are you so concerned? And he'll prop up all the terrible things humans do to humans in the name of Christianity. I'm like, yeah, that's true. Yeah. And there's plenty of non-Christians who've done really, really horrible things too. And we could all do better. But don't treat me like I'm an idiot because I have faith and it's founded on something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us today. I'm going to let Joe have the last word there, and because I often have it. And if you have comments, questions, let us know. Otherwise, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on Sunday.
Thanks, folks.